Okay, I would like to call to order the City of Port Orchard's Finance Committee of October 19th, 2021. And essentially our agenda starts with, as usual, our sales tax revenue report. So I guess our just financial report. So Noah, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, we'll start with the sales tax REIT report, like always. Again, for the month of September, great sales tax numbers. Again, we've received $603,000 for the month of September. And when we compare that to 2020, it is approximately about $60,000 more than we collected last year at this time. Year to date, year over year actuals, we're about 22% year over year ahead of where we were in 2020. For our budget, we're about 32% of where we budgeted for the first 9 months of the year. So incredible sales tax numbers continue to come in.
Excellent. Got her hand raised there.
Oh, go ahead.
I put my hand up because I realize that those sales tax numbers and the REIT numbers are like a 2-month delay. Is that correct?
Yes.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So when I look at the year over year changes to actuals, what would be March and April are considerably outliers. And I was wondering, do we have any idea what prompted that large sales tax revenue during those particular months? We received them in what, June and July. The one is 187 and the one is basically 160,000 difference. And I was just wondering, do we have any idea what caused that bump?
When I've talked to Corey about this in the past and she's dove into these numbers, it's primarily building materials.
Okay.
Whether it's us going to Lowe's and doing home improvement or the materials related to housing construction. Okay. And right now, our normally we would have in a strong economy like this, lots of car sales, and they don't have any inventory. I do know, talking to Shane Woods, the general manager at the Ford store, they finally have getting some of their production problems solved. He has 46 units in route. My goodness. And he normally has about 120 new cars, and it was like 12. He had here a couple of weeks ago when I talked to him.
Okay. So that would make sense if that was for March and April. It would be getting supplies for summer construction. That makes sense. I just was trying to, in my own mind, figure out what the bump would have been.
Yeah, but I think we're going to see in the fourth quarter a jump due to car sales, because the inventory, all kinds of people have cars ordered. And they're going to come in and be sold.
Okay.
I would think that a part of what's contributing to that home improvement sales is also during that period of time, the price of lumber was sky high. So I think that has some of it as well.
Contributed.
Yeah. And then we looked at our REIT collections. Again, we've talked about this before. We have already exceeded our biennial budget. So we've collected a total of $1.76 million. Again, we only budgeted 1.4 for the biennium, so well over our biennial budget. Continues to remain strong. Again, year over year, September 2020 through September 2021, we're 147% over what we collected in 2020. And just the 1 month comparison, we're looking at about $106,000 more than we collected in 2020. So REIT sales continue to be really, really strong.
And of course, we had a really good, strong July with what was that? The apartments that sold?
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
A couple of them, I think.
Yeah.
Yep.
Good news.
So good news on the sales tax and REIT, real strong revenue sources there, which lead us into our income or our fund balances. Again, which we've talked about every month here. All healthy balances, all real strong. We have strong revenues right now, and currently our expenses are on track with their fiscal year budget. So everything, it remains positive and nothing of concerning at this moment in time, which is really useful and helpful as we go into the budget conversation tonight and next week. Are there any questions on the ending fund balances at this time?
No, is there can you blow that up just a little bit? Go to the grand total. Scroll down. Oh, it's 54. Okay, that looked like a dollar sign, and so it looked like it was only 4 million there with the total ending fund balance. I'm like, well, that can't be right.
Yeah.
It's a 5. Thank you. It was just really small font. Need my glasses.
So I'll move on to the next report. We've been providing these reports quarterly, both on the impact fees and the CFCs, since we adopted the biennial budget. Again, when we adopted the biennial budget, we took on more revenue risk with these particular sources than we had in prior years. And thankfully, it is all playing out. And in fact, we have exceeded our biennial budget for both our water capital CFCs as well as our sewer CFCs. I mean, excuse me, our fiscal year. Okay, we've exceeded our fiscal year budget for these two categories. Any questions or concerns there? And again, for those that tune in later, these are only eligible to use for our water capital projects as well as our sewer capital projects. So very much needed for all the infrastructure projects that we have going on.
Those numbers don't include any loans, do they?
No, this is just the revenues coming in.
Just the revenue. Thank you.
Yeah. If you want to see a kind of larger perspective, you can look at the monthly budget report that I sent out yesterday on those particular funds where they do include debt service numbers.
Why do you think that water is so far outpacing sewer? Not that any of this is bad news, it's just drastically different.
Nick had remember the Cheers site prepaid their fee. Was that how much was that? 600,000, Nick?
I think that was 600,000. And then the Sydney Road apartments, they got a credit for sewer, but had to pay full boat on water.
Got it.
Yep.
Thank you.
So very good news on the CFC side. And then we'll turn our attention to the impact fees. Again, this is the table that we put up every quarter to track how well we are coming in against our budget as well as obligated expenses. Now, this table has been updated to incorporate all of the mid-year modifications in our 22, and I'm doing so in the 21-22 obligated expenses. So any of the stuff we discussed last week has now been included. And again, what's positive about this is you can see all these revenue sources come in positive. So with our capital project adjustments, factoring those in, assuming those get adopted in the budget, we'll expect to end 2022 with positive balances.
So Noah, you do a really good job of capturing future obligations, even if they're not in the biennial, in particular to the REIT funds. Mm-hmm. And we've got some expenses related to the pathway coming. How far does these numbers into the outlook? How much of that have we captured? So are these in excess of those obligations, or do we need to start picking away at those future obligations? We identified a number for our estimate, and I just want to make sure that those are included in that before we start spending. I don't want to spend the dollars twice.
Right.
Maybe you can get back to me on that.
Okay. Yeah, because it's a more complex question, at least for the answer side, because there is some of it built in, but part of the pathways, we need to update our project cost estimates as well. Mm-hmm. So at one point in time, almost a year ago, we looked at that project and what we thought it would cost. And as soon as I think Public Works is ready, we should take a look at that again and update it as we have some new information.
Because there's some balances here. I just want to make sure that we've incorporated those future obligations into these balances.
Okay. And you'll notice the one on the far right, the Blueberry Path, again, Blueberry Bethel Fund 304, in prior reports, this actually had an ending fund balance, but again, now I'm building into our modifications as one of the proposed projects to work on, and we would then spend that $234,000 from this project.
No, the transportation column, is that the TBD?
That's the transportation impact fees. The TBD is paid out of our 002 fund and first dollar in, first dollar out type of approach.
So you have the McCormick Woods transportation impact, and then you have the overall transportation impact.
Yeah, and we signed an agreement with McCormick, so technically we can commingle those funds. I want to continue to display it until, I was hoping just to draw down the McCormick Transportation Impact Fund historically as a reference, so we can always demonstrate what we spent those monies on. And then once we've spent those down, you know, that fund column will go away, and we only will have the park impact fee as well as the transportation impact fee.
Not wanting to go down a rabbit hole, but just a quick question on the TBD. We have the ability to increase that after a certain period of time. Have we reached that period?
Oh, yes.
We have, so. Okay.
Yeah, and I believe, Beck, you brought this up at the Transportation Committee earlier in the year at looking into whether transitioning from a fee to a tax.
We have some different options with the TBD, John. And one of the things that we talked about at the Transportation Committee was taking 1/10 or 0.2% sales tax to our voters. The thought with that, and I think we talked about that a little bit at our retreat earlier this year. And the thought was, the discussion on that was that the citizens of Port Orchard only represent a portion of the people who use our roads. Right. And obviously our citizens use the roads up to their driveway, but all of South Kitsap uses Bethel, Pottery, Sydney, you know, and some of those other major roads and so we were trying to figure out how to capture that. And that would be with this 1% sales tax, or 0.1% or 0.2, whatever it was. The other thing we could do as the TBD is we right now have a $20 car tab fee. And I believe, I'd have to check it, but I think we can take that up to 50 councilmatically. It may only be 40. So that would be another opportunity for us. That particular fee, as we grow and we have more residents, we have more cars. And that hasn't been discussed at length at transportation, but the sales tax ask of our public was.
Not to want to go down this rabbit hole, and we can stop here, but did the committee look at what the revenue projections would be for either of those two options?
Well, I think you could take what we get now for TBD. Isn't that a couple $100,000 a year, Noah, or is it 100,000 a year?
Yeah, it's a couple $100,000.
A couple hundred, and if we doubled it, you could double that. The sales tax revenue, if we just look at our numbers we have now and did a 0.1%, what would that increase be? It's obviously much more significant when you do the sales tax.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and it would be more, as you suggest, because we would be collecting sales tax from a larger portion of the South End versus the automobiles that live in the city. So correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Want to go down the rabbit hole, but just curious. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we did look at it briefly, and the sales tax approach did provide significantly more revenue. So, and then and that's before this year's results in sales tax collection. So that would obviously have changed significantly.
Yeah, and I think if we could show our voters the difference between the two, and have them understand where, you know, there are, to Beck's point, many users that don't live here using our roads, and we could spread that across those other people. It's a massive benefit to the residents of Port Orchard.
It's also a massive benefit to the rest of the South Kitsap residents because in order to pass a revenue package, we would have to have a very detailed plan as to exactly what we're going to do. And if the plan allowed us to finish Bethel, that would improve the transportation of many, many people and not just residents. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's go big and fix Bethel and Sedgwick.
Oh, exactly. Or we're going to have a level of service issues out on Sydney and Pottery pretty quick too.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about Sedgwick, Rob, but I just have this knee-jerk reaction of why are we fixing the state highway?
Yeah. But
when you say that, and John, we don't necessarily want to go down this rabbit hole, but as far as transportation is concerned on a regional level, and by regional, I mean countywide, I believe we need to reframe our ask for anything on Sedgwick and reframe it as State Highway 160 corridor.
I agree. And
our neighbors up north do.
I mean, if I would rather see us take the money that we would be spending on Sedgwick and put it in repaving our city streets. But let's move on the agenda of our finance committee. Noah?
The next, I want to have a dry run with the finance committee. This is the revenue and sources presentation for next week. So just again, wanted to have a dry run and get your guys' feedback. So we're going to review the revenue and sources for the remaining of the biennium. Again, this is to allow the finance committee and council public time to absorb the information as a part of our preliminary budget presentation next week. And then we'll take action. So next week, we're going to hold the public hearing on the revenue sources as required by 84, 55, 120. And as required by this RCW, the revenue sources, we're really focusing on property taxes and those funds that impact, which are our 002 and 001 fund. So in this slide, again, we focus on the total tax revenue coming into the city. I'm one slide ahead of you, I'm sorry. On this slide, we focus on the tax revenue coming into the city. And in total, we have our property taxes, our retail sales use tax, which we've kind of gone over as a finance committee and talked about the strength there, and then the other taxes that make up that pie. I'm going to do one thing here because this is not working the way it's supposed to. Okay, I'm gonna bring this on the PDF because on my screen it wasn't moving correctly. And so I was continuing to be off a slide. Not sure why. I'll look into that. Okay, so we're gonna move down here. On this side, this again represents the 21-22 budgeted tax revenue. As we identify here, the three largest taxing sources are retail sales and property taxes, and then followed by other taxes. The sales tax is the largest source, representing nearly 50% of our biennial budget, followed by property tax, the second largest, at roughly around 30%, and then finally the other taxes making up the other 20%. You know, of the other taxes, the three largest, representing 40% of that value, are the electric tax, telephone, and utilities.
Noah, would it be helpful just to see those three buckets if you created also a subtotal for the other taxes? You know what I mean?
For the subtotal of these three?
No. Going all the way down, like your other taxes there, you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 9 different taxes?
Correct.
And so just above the total, what if you had like
do a
subtotal other taxes, just so you can see that those percentages?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm gonna make a note here on my other slide. Okay, that's a good comment. Thank you.
You bet.
And maybe this helps the answer a little bit, but I kind of like the idea of subtotaling it there.
Enable you to get one clean pie chart as well.
Yeah. So then on this pie chart, what I'm trying to do is demonstrate the other revenue sources all identified in that smaller chart there. Again, that totals $4.06 million. And in the top three categories of the other revenue sources, we have our intergovernmental at about $1.5 million. Again, this is primarily federal and state grant revenue. We do have some motor vehicle fuel tax percent in there, as well as some street capital, which is a very small amount. The second largest one is our charges for goods and services at $778,800, and then followed up by our planning and court fees. Lastly, we have permits and licenses at $963,500. And that actually is an important one this year thus far.
Can you go back a slide real quick just to see if I think I missed a number. 1.5. You had in that pie chart of your other taxes, one of them, for example, is 1.5 million, but I'm not seeing it here.
Because the other, so this represents all taxes, and then we bring in the remaining amount. So when we look at this chart, you see the taxes, and this is all the revenue funding for the city and the general fund. So it kind of broadens it, and then we try to focus on this other portion here, if that makes sense.
So I think the other chart represents only the left pie chart, and then this right pie chart is a subset.
Correct.
Well, what made up the 4,066,000 on the other chart?
Going up here. The 4,066,000 is actually down here on this pie chart, and that is the other revenue sources that are identified here.
Okay, other revenues. So so they're really different slides. Okay.
They're really a different breakout.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. And then of the other revenue, you can see the 1.5 million, which is
John, if you look at
governmental.
The previous slide, it shows a total of 20 million, and this shows a total of 24.
24. Exactly. It's the other revenue, not the other taxes. Yep.
Right.
Yep. Yeah.
Interesting, because we went down that transportation rabbit hole. Do you want just casually, and I don't know if it's important, just to mention that although our sales tax has increased, our gas revenue has decreased? Because I believe it has.
We can certainly take a look at that. I believe you're right, Beck, but we should take a look. I haven't looked at it in a while since you last requested, probably.
Yeah.
Okay, I made a note to look into that.
That's based on gallonage, right? So much a gallon.
No, it's based on population. We get our gas tax revenue based on our population.
No, I understand, but the reason for decline is because of the more efficient vehicles, blah, 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 blah. We're not selling as much gasoline.
Correct.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, I guess it'd be interesting to kind of see what WASDOT or the Washington State Department of Transportation is saying about the impact of COVID and teleworking on our fuel tax system, more so than alternative vehicles. I think that's probably an interesting topic.
And I think that's why we looked at it last time, was to see how COVID was affecting that revenue source.
Right. Yep. I believe you're correct.
And
even with everybody that's teleworking, that traffic seems to be as bad or worse than it was pre-COVID, no matter where I drive.
So then on this slide, we're taking a look at the full 2021 year-to-date actuals compared to our 21-22 budget. Again, you'll notice the tax revenue collected year to date is roughly 42% of our biannual budget. And as we talked about sales tax being strong this first year, it's still only about 48% of our biannual budget collected thus far. Property tax, we've only collected 28% of our biannual budget, and we actually haven't received our October collections yet, so that number should tick up at the end of this month. The other taxes, we have collected nearly 100% of our 21-22 biennial budget. So this is kind of an interesting to look at here. Two revenue categories to highlight here are the license and permits. And I think that resonates with this finance committee fairly well, as we've collected 82% of our biannual budgets. Again, this is a result of all the billing activity and permit applications that are coming in, as well as I think there was an adjustment on some of the fee rates, but primarily driven by all the activity.
Right.
The other large revenue category here that is far exceeded what we budgeted is the intergovernmental revenue. Again, this is a direct result of the $1.4 million we received from the American Rescue Plan Act, or ARPA. So those two particular revenue sources are really driving our other revenues to be nearly 100% of our biennial budget, if you look at the percentages. So overall, we've received roughly 52% of our biennial budget in our tax revenues, again, with the primary drivers based on higher percentages in sales tax collections, building permit activity, and the American Rescue Plan Act money.
No, one of the things, and I'm not sure if there's an easy way to do this, but it's impressive. You can look at sales tax, for example. We're almost 50% of our biennial expectations, and we're 9 months into the first year.
Right.
I'm trying to figure out how, if we were to take the 9 months of actual and add the 3 quarters, or excuse me, the 3 months that are left at the budgeted amounts, how much would that equate? And would that, obviously it would be more than 50%. People can easily deal with 50% of the period has gone by versus, well, 75% of the first year has gone by, making that equation.
Right. Yeah. I follow what you're saying there. Although it is a little difficult. And the other piece, again, this is going to come up tonight as we propose our budget modifications. One of the revenue modifications that we are modifying is the sales tax. So the sales tax is going to be modified to help support the additional expenditure authority. So when we look at this later, you'll see that the budget for 21-22 is actually adjusted. And so the percentages will come down to be more in line with the month-to-month actual collection.
Yeah.
So I show it as it was originally adopted and kind of year to date to give a little bit of perspective as we kind of move into those conversations that we know they're positive and strong. But once we make that budget adjustment, then it'll tell a different picture.
Right. So when we get to the end of the year, then we may not, because we're going to make budget adjustments now, it won't be quite as rosy, even though it's significantly higher than what we brought in last year.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yep. So on this next table, we provide the historic property tax data and the proposed 2022 levy to be adopted next week. And again, as a reminder, property tax represents about 30% of our overall budget of tax revenue for our general fund, our 001 fund, as well as our street operations fund, 002. For 2022, we are proposing a property tax levy of approximately $3.182 million. And again, as the mayor and I were discussing, it's always important to remember that Washington State has the most complex property tax methodologies nationwide. So in Washington State, it has a budget-based system of property taxation, meaning as part of the budget process, the city establishes the amount of property tax revenue needed to fund the budget. Then that amount needed to fund the budget is called the levy. The city establishes this levy amount, and the county then will calculate the levy rate required to raise that amount of revenue using the assessed value and other levies that are established by other taxing districts within our boundaries. Again, as part of the process, we will certify that to the county by the end of November. And I'm hoping to have that adopted next week as a part of our council meeting, so I can do it well in advance of our deadline. For 2022, we have identified a total of $3.182 million of levy needed. And again, both levy amounts and levy rates are subject to change depending on the outcomes of our fire districts, our library districts, and other state utilities.
Interesting that our levy rate has gone down every year since 17, but the amount we collect has gone up. Property values have increased.
Property values have increased, yep. And again, this is just another way to show the growth of the property tax revenue collections with, again, 2022 as far as our levy. And much of this growth is due to new construction and housing. Yep. Again, we'll see that on actually the next slide. So on this next slide, I'll just point this out. Again, we're just comparing the years 21, 22 until breakdown. But the total levy for 2021 was $3,041,000. And so for 2022, we can collect an additional $14,767. But at that point, we hit our lid. And as you can see there, it only represents about 0.5% increase. So not 1%, it's less than that. It's about 0.5% increase per levy amount. But the big values that's in helping our levy, our tax lien levy, is the new construction of roughly $114,655. And again, you can even look back to 2021 and note that the new construction represented about $63,000. So with the combination of those two for our biennial budgeting purposes, about $180,000 of that additional levy is coming just from new construction.
So the existing homeowner in Port Orchard will actually see a decrease in the amount that the city collects on their tax bill.
Due to the complexity of the calculation, yeah, it's hard to say for sure anyone's individual impact because it's all based on their assessed value in relation to their neighbors. But with new construction coming on with higher assessed value, that is a potential.
Right. I mean, their property is going to go up in value as well and is going to be captured. But because of the lower levy rate, in theory, the amount that the city will be collecting off the current resident will actually go down. Now, the revenue coming to the city is going up because of new construction and the overall increase in property values.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd be careful to make that statement. I wouldn't make that statement because no matter how we try to calculate it, we are increasing taxes by almost $15,000, but that's spread out amongst the entire city.
Exactly. And some of that,
yeah. Some people could see a reduction. It's possible.
Yeah, it's possible. It would be a nightmare to try to explain it to the average homeowner, but
I think this particular part of the presentation goes over most everyone's heads, Noah, because it is quite complicated.
Yeah.
So keeping it simple and high level, I think, is a good thing because we can't drill down and make everyone totally understand it.
Yeah, I think the most easy thing to understand with what we just kind of debated there is the fact that had we not had new construction of $114,000 in 2022, existing ratepayers would have to swallow that portion of that pill.
Well, and the other thing that, it's a simple thing for people. Everybody knows that governments can raise it a max of 1%. In reality, we're not raising more than less than 0.5%.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
And part of the reason we can do that is because of the new construction. So,
yeah.
So in a roundabout way, the citizens of Port Orchard are benefiting from all these developers.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And a piece of it, though, too, is that our other junior taxing districts, like the fire district and the library, live in our pot of dollars. And when they increase, take their full amount, then it eats away at our portion too. That contributes. It's like, as Noah and I were debating this earlier in the week, and we have by far the most complicated system I've ever seen.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it doesn't make it real easy to explain. All right. So then, of course, we want to talk about retail sales and use tax. I mean, we talk about it quite a bit, but again, this will be for the full council and general public. As a reminder, the city of Port Orchard receives a 0.84% sales tax, which for this year has been very strong, as we've talked about. So year to date, we've collected roughly 97% of what we estimated or budgeted to our original budget for the fiscal year. So we are on track for 3/4 of the year. Sales tax revenue will exceed our current fiscal year budget. And as we have discussed in the Finance Committee, the mid-biennial modifications, we are planning on increasing the budget revenue target, again, which will change the representation of these numbers. Again, the purpose of that is to help fund the additional expenditure requests coming forward as part of this modifications.
Exactly. We're taking advantage of the healthy economy by doing more for the community.
Yep. So here's just another table depicting the sales tax revenue. Again, when we're comparing 3/4 of 2020 against the first 3/4 of 2021, we show a growth rate of 21%. For the biennial period, we actually budgeted a growth rate of 4.5% roughly. So this is much stronger actual results than we budgeted when we set the biennial budget. What's kind of interesting is that there's still, depending on who you are, there's still some economic commentary out there discussing an anticipated slowdown to the economy coming in late 21, which is kind of the fall winter season through 2022. So I guess we just keep an eye on it, although we have not experienced that yet. We just keep listening to see if that really is going to happen.
Do you know, is that because of the supply chain issues or anything else?
Multiple things. I mean, we've talked about supply chain issues, talks about the impact of COVID, and now the new policies, both by the state and federal level, and how that's going to impact an employment base. So many factors are rolling into the discussion. And I guess all we can do is really wait it out to see if it shows up in the data.
When in our ARPA dollar discussions at Mayor's Exchanges, we're in a different place here than Kitsap County than other places are. And there are jurisdictions out there that had revenue loss over the last couple of year and a half, and that isn't just so they're able to use those ARPA dollars to replenish that. And fortunately, we don't have that option available to us.
Yep. So maybe I'll get some feedback from the committee here if this slide is necessary. Again, just showing sales tax. I always try to show the data differently, knowing people can absorb it differently. So I've got tables, charts, and this is just a chart of the prior slide, really, showing the growth and sales tax collection by year. It's not anything new, it's just depicted differently. And so I can keep it in or take it out, and kind of would like your guys' feedback on that.
I would suggest you keep it in because, as you suggest, people see things and learn differently. And this one answers the question about just exactly what did COVID do to our local economy. You can kind of see it month to month.
I'd like to go down the rabbit hole again. And when Noah brought up this slide that says we get 0.84% of the sales tax revenue, right there, I just did a round number and said if our annual sales tax was $5 million, that equates to about whatever the $595 million or whatever. And then I multiplied that times the 0.1% if we went for that with the TBD, and it would be about 595,000 a year increase, which isn't that much different than the $40 if we raise the tab.
Yeah,
couple hundred thousand. So anyway, like I said, I love to play with numbers, and I went down the rabbit hole. So thank you.
Well, it's good information to know, just so you know which, if any, will make a difference.
One path is much easier than the other. Yeah.
Well, so that concludes the revenue sources presentation. Again, the whole purpose of that is kind of focus on how you're using your property tax revenue. And again, those support our general fund and our street operations fund, along with the other taxing sources. For a street, we got TBD, and our general fund, we got sales tax. So that would conclude my remarks.
All righty.
Yeah, I thought it was a nice presentation, Noah.
I did too.
What about the colors? Councilmember Shang's always concerned about the colors. Did you get the colors right?
I like the colors. I think it's really nice.
On brand.
So I left a little bit of space here on this agenda to talk about the 2021-22 mid-year review, and I'll pull that up real quick. Again, we're going to talk about it in depth tonight, so I don't want to take up too much of your time because we have a little break before our big session. But is there anything on here on the packet that you guys wanted to talk about, had some questions, or wanted to bring up in tonight's discussion?
No, personally, it is what it is. So share it with the council.
One thing to remind you of is that this committee recommended we add $12,000 to the security card project, and that wouldn't be enough. That 12,000 that to do the active club, it'd need to be another $20,000, and I would caution. I don't think it's worth. It's a total of, it'd be a $30,000 project to do the active club, and I'm not certain that that's a good expenditure at this point. I think when we complete the community center, we're looking at that. Probably be looking at that building differently, whether it's us remodeling it and using it in a different fashion or something. But I'm not certain that $30,000 investment in security in that building is a good investment. So, but it's your guys' decision.
I personally don't have a problem holding off on that now until we kind of figure out what the future is. But I think at some point, and I look to you, Rob, I was looking at it from the standpoint of how much staff time and hassle it takes to administer the access to that building. Over the years, I've heard, people lose keys, they move on, they don't turn in keys, that we get to hand out keys and make sure they get, it just seems like a staff nightmare to administer it, where doing it electronically would make life a lot easier.
I completely agree. And for $10,000, $12,000, that's a huge convenience. I struggle with that larger expenditure, but I'll defer to you guys.
Yeah, well,
our staff would love it. Staff would love to not have to issue keys anymore. But we don't spend more than $1,000 or $2,000 rekeying that thing when we do.
Yeah, but there's hassle to go along with it. But let's leave it in here and we'll talk about it to full council and see if if everybody has an opinion.
So I think the intent is tonight. Again, it's a public hearing, so we'll do an introduction into the staff report. I'll ask the mayor to open the hearing, and then we'll go through the highlights of the budget amendments here. You can see here I've kind of grouped and organized it differently since the last time we've talked. It's now organized by fund. And whether it's an operational expense or a capital expense. So I thought that was helpful. So you can see what are going to be kind of operational ongoing expenses versus capital expenses. And then the other piece that I added in here is what I believe Beck had asked for, is to show the impact of the fund, beginning fund balance, revenue, and expenses by fund. So for example, you can see here with the current expense fund, our original budget, we had a $3.975 million beginning fund balance budgeted. With this amendment, we are adjusting it by $2.97 million. So we're going to have a new beginning fund balance of $6.952 million, again, which reflects our actuals on the beginning side. More importantly, though, is how does all of these impact all these adjustments impact our ending fund balance. So you can see that when we set the budget for 21-22 for the general fund, we anticipated ending with a $1.7 million ending fund balance. With the adjustments in beginning fund balance, adjustments on the revenue side, primarily the sales tax, like we talked about, as well as some permitting adjustments, all the expenses, which we'll go through above. Our ending fund balance adjustment will be roughly $1.4 million to the positive, which would make our ending fund balance for the 2022 $3.2 million. So a higher ending fund balance, even after we factor in all these adjustments on revenue and expenses. Now I'm going to qualify that by saying a big portion of this $3.2 million is restricted funding because it's ARPA money as well as our affordable housing money, and there's some rec reserve money in there too. So there is a balance in there that we would hold in a restricted state that we would use for only those purposes. And then the other piece we would look to see if does this hit the cash flow targets, which it does. So that's all great news.
So just following up on your comment, then what you're suggesting is that those additional expenses, there isn't sufficient additional expenses to use up those restricted dollars. Just setting aside additional funds in a restricted category.
Correct. Yeah, because we'll take the ARPA example. We do not have, for the remainder of 21 and 22, the full budget of those dollars. So we budgeted $900,000 of the 1.4 million, meaning we would have roughly $500,000 still to be used for the ARPA requirements, but it's just not going to occur in 21, 22 at this moment in time as we have looked at the projects.
So we don't have enough projects to spend all of the appropriate projects to spend all of the ARPA dollars. Correct.
Yeah. And then again, as we get into 22 and have updates on costs and projects, that could all change.
Yeah.
The other piece that I did not put in this budget again, because I didn't want to overstate the ending fund balance, is the other remaining ARPA dollars, which we'll receive next year. Because we received ARPA in two tranches, 1.4 million this year, 1.4 million next year. This budget amendment is only taking into consideration the 1.4 million we have received and have identified some level of funding for. I am not modifying the budget for the additional $1.4 million. Again, I'm not required to as a revenue source, only if it were increasing our expenditure authority am I required to. So I didn't feel the need to, and I thought it would kind of complicate the picture of the ending fund balance if I continue to put more restricted dollars in there.
Can we talk a little bit about if you go down, I guess what I want to talk about is we're getting those loans and you're putting the loans in as revenue. And then we have part of the construction expenses or the planning expenses, whatever we're using those loans for, budgeted for this biennium, but part of it is not. And we haven't budgeted in yet the debt service. So I want to make sure that we realize if those have high balances, those monies are already earmarked. Did I make any sense?
Obligated is those dollars are obligated.
Right.
Yeah, that's a fair and accurate point that in future biennial periods in 23, 24, maybe not even 2023, just due to the timing of the projects and when we draw on the funds and when those loans actually start, they might not actually start until 2024, 2025 before debt service payments actually kick in. Yeah. Now, what we did do is for our Well 13 loan, we have been making payments on that. We made our first payment this year on that. So that is now factored into the budget and in our expenses. And that showed up on this last month's monthly budget report. If you take a look at the debt service payments made there. So that one is showing up. The other thing that we did as part of this budget, I advocate with the finance committee that one thing we should look to do is start pre-funding those debt service payments by 1 to 2 years so that we would have those in the debt service reserve fund once those payments came into play. And what you can see, we haven't done that with all of our debt yet, but we did make its first step with our marina pump station loan, where you can see here, we budgeted $550,000 of sewer CFC revenue to be transferred into our debt service fund as pre-funding. So this amount will get us at least 1 to 2 years of debt service payments for the Marina Pump Station. Again, we don't expect that loan to come into play until 2024. So again, getting ahead of those debt service payments is going to have us in a stronger position. And I think that's your biggest concern is, will we have the money to make the debt service payments? So I think if we can commit to that with all these revenue upswings that we're having, again, in the next biennial budget, continue to set aside those debt service payments. So if we could get to a place where we have at least 1 to 2 years of debt service payments pre-funded for all our debt, we're in a really strong position then.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good move.
Thank you, because that was my concern, Noah.
Yeah. An extreme example in our past, when we built the bypass bridge, we paid 1/3 of that cost of that bridge, and the county paid 2/3. And we worked it to where the county made the first 2/3 of the payments, but we started making our payments right away. And when it came time for us to start paying the last third, we were able just to pay it all off at once.
Yeah.
And great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Looks good. Anything else?
I just expect to see a whole bunch of glazed eyes this evening when you talk about all these numbers.
Exactly.
All the finance geeks are here.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see how many of the council members are awake.
Yeah.
I guess how much in depth would you guys recommend we go into with the full council? We've given the complete packet. I mean, I only got 60 minutes, I guess is the only reason I ask. If I had 2 hours, I'd just go through the same kind of process we went through before.
I'm just going to interject here. And you're asking what we should do for the full council. And I want to just remind us that this is also for the public view.
Yeah.
And so you want to keep it simple so that the public can digest what you're saying, as well as the council members, and thorough enough so that the public, has a good grasp on what we're doing.
I personally think if you're going to spend, you need to tell folks about the revenue side of this ledger and kind of where we look at. But I think most people, the council is going to be interested in, okay, where are you proposing to spend more in and on what?
And I think how it's laid out too, he's got it by funds. And then there's the non-bolded items, which are things we've already committed to doing and we've already all talked about. So I think it's more important to hit and talk about, if anything, the larger bulleted items.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Because we've already spent the money on we've already committed and spent the money and awarded contracts on the other stuff.
Yeah, we've already approved the allocation for those other things. So
yeah, and I think too, for people to understand the ending fund balances, right? Because in every instance there, we are making progress with ending fund balances of where we started this biennium, which is significant. People sometimes think that, we're overspending, outliving our means, and that's not the case. Fund balances are growing.
Yeah.
All good comments. Thank you.
All right. We've got about 30 minutes before the work study begins. Is there anything else for the good of the order? Otherwise, I guess we'll declare the meeting adjourned. Thanks, everybody, and see you in 30 minutes.
Sounds good.